Hello everyone, this is Major Green, also known as Nitpicking Nerd, and this is a review of episode 7 of the Orville called Majority Rule, and I really like this episode, and I kind of knew right away what it's going to be about once I saw that upvote downvote symbol. Right away I realized exactly what they're going to do. Basically they show a planet whose society is pretty much entirely based on the upvotes and downvotes, which is obviously a parody satire of what's actually happening in our society today, especially on social media such as YouTube, Facebook and so on. And I absolutely love this idea. I love this whole social satire thing, and this is the kind of stuff that Star Trek used to do in the past. And not just Star Trek, a lot of science fiction shows did that. Twilight Zone, Sliders, SG-1, all those science fiction shows often had episodes kind of criticizing something in our society, criticizing humanity. They all used the alien civilizations or parallel dimensions to basically show us kind of a what-if scenario of something that actually exists today, and in this way to poke fun at it and to criticize it, and it's a good thing. I loved all those kinds of episodes in all those shows, so it's not just a Star Trek thing, it's something that was common in all science fiction. And even shows like South Park are doing this often, kind of making fun of something that is an actual issue, and not just to make fun of it, but also to kind of make a point, and in a very clever way, in a very correct way oftentimes, I think, in my opinion. And you know, many classic science fiction movies in the past also did that. For example, Planet of the Apes, they basically used a metaphor of an alien planet with apes to actually poke fun at humanity today. And so this is something that was always very common in older science fiction. And this is what Star Trek used to do in the past as well, before it changed into a kind of Battlestar Galactica, Star Wars kind of thing, and became just about action and special effects. And so it became more about eye candy than actual stories and actual topics, philosophical, political, social topics. And so I say again that the Orville actually captures the true spirit of Star Trek, what Star Trek used to be, much more than all the recent movies and the new TV show. So back to this episode. So this is basically a parody of our society today that is so heavily dependent on the social media system and the whole public shaming. And it also shows exactly the reasons why this system is not so good, because oftentimes people judge other people not really because of the actual issue or what they actually did wrong, but instead they judge them by their looks, if they're pretty or not, if they're funny or not, if they're talented, sometimes judging a person by their history from many years before, or something bad they did many years before. And this is exactly why this is a flawed system. This is why it cannot really be used. It's not really a justice system. And especially because people don't actually bother to fact check things. And so innocent people might easily be accused for doing something they didn't actually do, and if it spreads on social media, then it can actually ruin a person's life. This whole society is completely dependent on this system of kind of like on YouTube upvote and downvotes, and this whole public shaming of people that they have to go and apologize for everything they did. This is so much satire of so many things in our actual society today. And also there were tiny bits of satire of other things. For example, someone tells Elara that she cannot wear that hat because that hat is only worn by a certain group, and so she has no right to wear it. So this really reminds me of, again, the kind of stuff we actually deal with in humanity. Basically, people have no freedom, people depend on what society tells them. So this is the way we behave toward each other, and so I love this episode for pointing out stuff like this and to show us how ridiculous it is. So this is just like the original Star Trek, kind of poking fun at humanity and making us understand why it's so stupid the way we behave toward each other over some silly stuff like this. Star Trek used to do that all the time with racism, making fun of racism, showing us how ridiculous it is and how ridiculous it would look to an actual alien if he actually visits us. How would more advanced aliens actually look at us if they see the way we behave? And so this is why I love shows like this, which actually makes people think about these topics, and maybe this will actually make people change and make people think about all these topics. And so this is why I absolutely love episodes like this. Now, of course, it's not perfect, and now I'm going to deal with all the negative parts. And I think my biggest problem in this episode was the fact that it was kind of cheap in the sense that if this is an actual alien planet, as they say, then why it is so similar to Earth. And I know they did address it in this episode, so that kind of makes it okay, and because this is a comedy show overall, that also makes it more okay. But still, I think it kind of lacks production value. I mean, if this was an actual alien planet, I kind of wish they would actually try harder to actually make it look more alien, because it basically looks exactly like Earth in every single way. That's kind of, maybe it would have been better off as a time travel episode or a parallel dimension episode. then it would have been perfectly okay that everything looks exactly like on Earth. And if it was a time travel episode in which they actually go back to the past, to the 21st century, then maybe they could say that this is actually our near future, that this is the actual humanity in the near future. But they basically say that it's a completely alien planet, which just happens to look exactly like 21st century Earth. So that's a little bit of a problem for me. I think as a science fiction show, it should try to make aliens look more alien and so on. And I know it's a problem because they had so many extras in this episode. Still, I would have appreciated if they did like a little bit something. I did like Alara's hat, by the way. That did look kind of unusual. So I would have appreciated it more if they had like a little bit more production value in this episode. On the other hand, maybe it only serves to really drive the point home that this is actually about our society today, and so maybe it's a good thing in a way. And again, because this is all a comedy show, then I guess it's more acceptable. If it was in an actual Star Trek episode in a serious way, then I would have criticized it a lot more. And yes, I know that it's very similar to many episodes in the original series, and I did criticize this in the old shows as well. And I'm talking specifically about the original series, in which they had episodes in which they showed kind of a parallel Earth, a planet that is exactly like Earth of the past in every single way, including the continents. That was just so ridiculous that I couldn't take it seriously in any way. And so I didn't like that in the original series, and so I kind of tend to dislike it a little bit here. But at least they didn't show that the continents looked identical. Like, that was way over the top. So it was way too ridiculous in that episode of Star Trek, and they even showed that even the English language existed on the planet. The same exact language developed on the planet, and it was everywhere on the streets, exactly the same. That was ridiculous. And they did have the same thing in this episode in the Orville. When they showed us the ice cream truck, you could see that they have everything in English. So that was a little bit of ridiculous. Now maybe the universal translator is translating it for us. I hope so. And the problem with the show is that it's not like a total comedy. Like, not everything is trying to be, like, not every moment is a joke. They are actually trying to have actual science fiction stories, and therefore I don't think it can be totally ridiculous in every single way. So that's my only real complaint about this episode, that it did feel a little bit cheap, that they didn't even try to make it to make any kind of alien spin on any of it. The one thing I did appreciate is that at least they made the cell phones look different. They made it a little bit wider on the top. And so at least they did a little bit of a change, so I did appreciate that. So Alara dressing up to hide her ears is obviously very similar to the way Spock always did it when he was in the past, or on other planets that couldn't know that he's an alien. He always had to cover his ears, so this is an obvious similarity. Also, the way she hides her nose is exactly the way that Kira did it when she went to the past. Also, apparently they have cloaking device on the shuttle now. I guess it's kind of necessary for it to make sense, so I'm okay with that. And in Star Trek they would just use transporters, but they don't have transporters in the show, which is a good thing. I think a transporter was too easy of a tool all the time, because they could always use it to beam someone out of trouble, and whenever they didn't want to use them, they always had to come up with excuses for why they can't use the transporter in this specific episode. So every other episode, they always had an ion storm or something preventing them to use the transporters, or some shielding from some rocks, and so it was often ridiculous the way they always had to come up with excuses for why the transporter can't be used. And so it's a good thing that in the show they just don't have transporters, so they don't have that easy get out of jail free card all the time. And so they have to play by this society's rules to get him out. And now the lawyer guy, not the lawyer, he calls himself a publicity officer. He's actually played by a guy who was in Star Trek. He played Major Hayes in Star Trek Enterprise. Another similarity with Star Trek was with the whole money scene, in which they said they don't have money in the future, and this planet still uses money. So take some of these papers so you can buy things on the planet. It really reminded me of Star Trek 4, the way Kirk gave money to everybody, and he also kind of poked fun at them at how they look, and so this was very similar to this scene. Also, Bortis sounded a lot like Worf in this episode, maybe a little bit too much. He had a line that sounded exactly like something Worf said in one episode. Bortis said, "A voice should be earned, not given away." And this is very similar to when Worf said, "Trust is earned, not given away." So I found that a little bit funny, but overall I enjoy it, and I love pointing out stuff like this, similarities. And you know, Star Trek is itself guilty in stealing a whole bunch of things from other movies and shows, and books, and even fan fiction on the internet, and games, and this is a topic that I'm going to talk about on a separate video in the near future. And one final thing about this whole concept, this really, as I said, this really is basically based on our society today. And especially I think it pokes fun at social media like YouTube. And recently on YouTube they really went crazy with the censorship and stuff. If you curse, if you say something wrong, they might punish you, they might terminate your channel, they might remove your videos. As a YouTuber I can tell you that I have to deal with this all the time. I have to be in constant fear. If I say something wrong or show something wrong, I might get punished for it. It is really sometimes a nightmare on YouTube, the way the system itself is punishing you just because some algorithms, some artificial intelligence that is checking the videos on YouTube is sometimes censoring you just for some misunderstanding, or just because some people flagged you falsely. Obviously, any system that is taken to extreme is a problem. This also reminds me of the episode Justice, in which they had a society with no crime. And the reason there is no crime is because they have the death penalty for even the smallest thing. So if you step on the grass, then you get the death penalty. And of course it means much less crime, but at what cost? I mean, a whole bunch of innocent people will get terminated just because they violated some tiny rule. And this is exactly the problem that on YouTube currently a lot of people are suffering, because the YouTube itself became like a little bit too fascistic. Like any single violation of anything, even if they suspect you for a violation, some automatic bot, some algorithm, some artificial intelligence suspects that you might have violated something, then you will get punished without any trial, without any means to defend yourself. So this is a very big topic actually in real life that I'm sure a lot of YouTubers know about. Maybe you, the viewers, if you don't have your own channels, you don't know how difficult it is, but it is actually almost a nightmare recently on YouTube to do anything. That's really unfortunate. I also think it kills creativity. A lot of people used to create a whole bunch of funny stuff, but now they are afraid to, because anything remotely offensive to anyone might actually get terminated. So it's really sad that YouTube is basically becoming too sanitized, and that basically kills all creativity, and it really makes YouTube a more boring place, in my opinion. It also reminds me of the movie Demolition Man, in which they showed us the near future, in which everything is so sanitized, everything is so censored, that if you say something wrong, if you curse, you get a ticket for it, you have to pay compensations. And that's exactly what's happening on YouTube right now. You might get punished financially for it, for the way you speak or the way you think. If you talk about topics that YouTube doesn't want you to talk about, you get punished. And people might actually have to start again using science fiction as a way to get past that censorship, just the way that Star Trek used to do in the past. Gene Roddenberry even said that himself directly. He wanted to deal with actual social issues, but he knew he would get censored on television, and so that's why he had to use science fiction as a way to discuss these topics by metaphor, to bypass that censorship. And so the way I see things are going on YouTube right now, we might have to do the same thing again. And it's really sad that we in the 21st century, we don't have free speech yet, but maybe we can bypass that by actually using science fiction to actually discuss everyday topics that we want to talk about, just like this episode did. So that's it for now, and I will see all of you next time. Bye bye.